Enjoy this movie, then visit BrainPop.com for much more. Marco. 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 Ow. Wait a second. Dear Tim and Moby, can you tell me about Marco Polo? Thanks, Oscar. Hey, Oscar. Marco Polo was a 13th century European merchant. He was from Venice, but he spent more than 20 years traveling around Asia. His adventures helped introduce many Europeans to the Far East. Back in the Middle Ages, Europe wasn't the global power it is today. Instead of a few dozen countries, it was broken up into hundreds of tiny kingdoms. They were centered around walled cities, more like towns by today's standards. Outside of those walls, it was a dangerous no-man's land. So in many places, people didn't engage much with the wider world. But Marco Polo's hometown of Venice was different. It was a city on the western end of the Silk Road. That was a network of trade routes connecting Europe to China. The Silk Road was 4,000 miles long, so few people made the full trip. Instead, they'd travel to nearby cities to buy or sell goods. Products would pass from city to city this way, like a relay race. Marco's father and uncle had made a nice little fortune doing that, but they couldn't help but wonder about the lands that produced the goods they traded in. So, Niccolo and Maffeo set out on an adventure. They left a few months before Marco was even born. He grew up wondering if he'd ever have a chance to meet his father. That day finally came when he was 15. Niccolo and Maffeo told of how they'd befriended Kublai Khan, ruler of China. His vast kingdom, the Mongol Empire, covered half the continent of Asia. The Khan was also curious about other regions. He asked the Polos to bring back scholars to teach him about European culture. While they were home, they invited Marco to join the family business, and thus began his 24-year odyssey into Asia. Well, the reason we know all about Marco instead of his uncle and father is because he wrote a book. The Travels of Marco Polo captivated readers with its incredible tales, like battling bandits, braving sandstorms, and encountering mythic beasts. A lot of that fantastic feel comes from Polo's co-author. Rustichello was a little-known author hoping to score a bestseller. He saw potential in Polo's travels, but wanted to inject them with action and drama. He was thinking more summer blockbuster than documentary film. The collection of tales was initially titled The Book of Marvels. It read like a catalog of all the astounding things Marco encountered. In Tibet, he came across immense cats covered in colorful stripes. In southern China, there were monstrous water lizards with huge jaws. He even saw a strange beast that looked like a unicorn crossed with a pig. No, they weren't made up at all. He had just never seen tigers before, or crocodiles, or rhinos, and neither had his readers. They loved the exotic details, especially when it came to the Khan's lavish life. 12,000 knights guarded his marble and gold palace, and each day he was presented with treasure from every corner of his kingdom. Polo's eye for intriguing detail also impressed Kublai Khan. The kingdom was so vast that the Khan couldn't go visit all of it, so he sent Polo on exploratory missions to the farthest reaches of the empire. After returning, Marco would tell the king vivid stories of what he'd seen. I don't think a European king would have been so welcoming toward a Chinese traveler, but the Khan was surprisingly tolerant of different cultures. He allowed his subjects to practice their own religion and follow their own traditions. The Mongol civilization was ahead of its time in other ways, too. They used heated rocks to keep their homes warm and take hot baths. Citizens could buy and sell goods with paper money. Europeans were centuries away from developing similar practices. Actually, many of Polo's readers were skeptical of such details. Their cities were supposed to be the centers of sophistication and progress. It was shocking to see how much they had to learn from Asian cultures. Today, modern scholars have their own reasons for doubt. Why isn't Polo mentioned at all in Mongol historical records? How could he leave out staples of Chinese life like tea and chopsticks? Most historians think the book is a mixture of fact and fiction. Polo definitely exaggerated more than a few of the stories, and probably borrowed other travelers' tales and blended them with his own. Well, the Khan died during Polo's return to Venice. The Mongol Empire split up into warring factions. That spelled the end of the Silk Road and safe routes east. Marco Polo never traveled to China again. Actually, the loss of the Silk Road had the opposite effect. Europeans sought other ways to get spices and textiles from the east. This period is known as the Age of Exploration. Many of its explorers, including Christopher Columbus, were inspired by Marco Polo. So, however much of the travels is made up, its impact is huge. To his dying day, Polo maintained that it was all true. When questioned about it, he replied, "I did not tell half of what I saw." There is no way I'm going to put that back on. Visit us at brainpop.com for more on this topic and hundreds of others. You'll find movies, games, quizzes, and activities. Learn more about the difference BrainPop can make.